negative speaker opened up his last speech by stating that we need to prove that federal courts are proven beyond a reasonable doubt to always work. But as we've agreed throughout this round, our contention as the affirmative team is not that federal courts are perfect, but that when compared to military commissions, they are better. And that is, again, our basic principle that we believe is still held to be true, as will be seen throughout our responses. I'd like to respond to a couple points brought up by the negative team, but first I'd like to bring up a point of intent versus reality. Intent versus reality. Throughout this speech, the negative team has made many speculative arguments suggesting that military commissions exist for a purpose. And that's something we even addressed in our very first speech. The fact that military commissions were designed to be good, but despite what they're intended to be, they have failed. And so the negative team's argumentation follows that trend. The idea that military commissions work, where the reality is the exact opposite. They have proven there's a lack of impact, but they have not demonstrated the validity of their points, only speculated on them. So I'd like to move on to the first voting issue, a reason to vote affirmative. First is that federal courts provide advantages. Now I have a couple points on this. First, due punishment in due time. The negative team attempted to respond to this by saying how federal courts sometimes fail, but they never fundamentally disproved that federal courts achieve punishment for terrorists in due time and also achieve due punishment, as brought up when we compared two different charges, or the same charge in two different systems, were different results because of 32 versus 4,000 charges. That advantage has more or less been dropped in the last couple speeches. The second advantage that was completely dropped was that of international cooperation. The fact that extradition will only be cooperated with if federal courts are the option. And that's something we guarantee through the passage of our plan, international cooperation with our counterterrorism partners, something completely dropped by the negative team. The second voting issue is that of military commissions provide no advantages. The first and main reason for this is evidence standards are the same. Now, I brought up a bunch of points of reputation in my speech, and my partner followed up in her last speech, how the evidence standards, while they are speculated to be different, actually do fall under the similar protections. Not only because of CIPA, the Classified Information Procedures Act, but with all the other types of evidence, such as hearsay and the exclusionary rules, there are exceptions that will apply in federal courts if there is some sort of threat, meaning that what happens in federal courts that would be considered a problem would also apply in military commissions as being a problem. In that example of Ahmed Gayani, not only did he actually receive a life sentence in federal court later than he was originally acquitted, but any advantage or problem that happened in federal courts would have happened in military commissions too. So what we can see is that because of all the exceptions that we provided, and the fact that CIPA exists shows that the evidence standards, contrary to public opinion, are actually very similar, if not the same. And not only that, but all of the pieces that the negative team brought up never impacted to an example where military commissions were objectively better and achieved an advantage where federal courts did not. They attacked federal courts, but did not support military commissions. So we can see that there's an overall lack of impact, and therefore military commissions provide no advantages. That's my second voting issue. And my third and final voting issue is that disadvantages don't apply. Looking back at the disadvantages brought up, I believe, in 2 and C. The first was that there's a national security threat. And my response is, again, not proven, not proven. They have speculated that there's a national security threat, but as I brought up in my original response, there's never been any attack on a court or prison in the United States. They can speculate that it could happen, but it could happen to anyone. No one is ever safe, per se. But based on the precedent of success, we can see that there's no credible national security threat. The second disadvantage was that there was injustice. And they brought up Ahmed Gayani, but we showed how, again, federal courts actually ended up giving him a life sentence, and there's no difference between the two systems. They brought up that cell phone example, talking about how perhaps there's that cell phone that Osama bin Laden's associates used to be able to spread terrorist ideology. But my partner did respond to that in her last speech, stating how the evidence standards were the same and the disclosure standards were the same. So that was definitely a time that federal courts failed, but that exact same failure would have happened in military commissions as well. So there's no impact to this. Again, we don't say that federal courts are perfect and flawless, but we are establishing how they are better in military commissions in any given situation. The third disadvantage they brought up is that federal courts are risked. And as my partner responded to this, they provided no impact. They provided no credible threat. They provided no precedent of a threat. And because of that, the national security interest has been proven to flow towards the affirmative team. There is no national security threat in federal courts. Because of that, what we are left with is the idea of justice, the idea of due punishment in due time, and the idea of international cooperation. And we have consistently demonstrated throughout this round that federal courts provide consistent and compelling advantages in these regards. And because of that, in every given situation where we need to try a terrorist, like the people who have been sitting in Guantanamo Bay for 17 years without being convicted for being associated with 9/11, the only reasonable option to make, the only decision to make that we need to make, is to use federal courts. and because federal courts achieve justice, we urge an affirmative decision. Thanks so much.